What's up, THS? I'm Mrs. Smith from the library. Our theme this week is photos that stop the world, and these are my top three. The stories I want to talk to you about today were brought to the forefront of cultural attention because of photographs. In a time before we had a word for pictures becoming viral, people connected to these stories were able to capture images that stopped the world, even if just for a few moments. The first photograph is a mugshot of an 11-year-old boy from Chicago named Robert Sandifer. That mugshot then was re-imaged into the cover of this book that tells his tragic story. This is Yummy, The Last Days of a Southside Shorty by Neri. Robert Sandifer would be a sixth grader if he went to school, but he hasn't been since he was about 8. In the mugshot taken by Chicago PD, he's 4 foot 6 inches tall and weighs about 68 pounds. His nickname, Yummy, comes from his love of cookies and candy. And on September 1994, the mugshot of Robert Yummy Sandifer is the cover of Time magazine. By the time this photograph was taken, Yummy had already been arrested like 30 times. He just stayed in trouble. His dad wasn't a part of his life. He was in prison on some felony gun charges. His mom was abusive and neglectful to him when he was younger. And so Yummy lives with his grandma in Roseland, which is a neighborhood on the south side of Chicago. Yummy becomes loosely affiliated with the Black Disciples, which is a gang that runs in that neighborhood. And he volunteers to basically run errands for them, which ends up with him committing a whole bunch of felonies that would get like an older person significant jail time if they were to get caught. One August afternoon, in full view of about a dozen witnesses who know him personally, Yummy fires a gun into a crowd of rival gang members. But instead of shooting any of them, he shoots and kills a 14-year-old girl named Siobhan Dean, who was sitting on her front porch. Yummy has made an enormous mess, and now the Black Disciples have to clean it up. That is, if the cops don't get to him first. This graphic novel is the story of an 11-year-old on the run from the police and his own people. It's a quick, compelling read, and it is my first book for our list of books about photos that stop the world. Our next book also centers around a boy from Chicago, although it takes place about 40 years earlier. After he was kidnapped, severely beaten, shot, and discarded in a river, the photo from his open casket funeral sparked a fire that accelerated the civil rights movement in the United States. This is Getting Away with Murder, the true story of the Emmett Till case by Chris Crowe. In 1955, racial segregation and Jim Crow laws are alive and well in the South, and Money, Mississippi is no exception. So that's why before he leaves his home in the suburbs of Chicago to visit his cousins in the South, his mom reminds him of how he is to behave if he's to encounter a white person. She knows that racial tensions are high, so she coaches him to always show deference, to keep his head down, to not speak unless spoken to, basically be seen and not heard. Now, there's no one left alive who can confirm whether or not Emmett obeyed his mother's instructions when he visited Bryant's grocery and meat market with his cousins that August evening. But a woman named Carolyn Bryant insisted that he didn't. Her allegations have changed over time, and they vary from him whistling at her or saying, "Hey, baby," to him actually like wrapping his arms around her waist and whispering obscene things in her ear. Whether or not any of this happened, whether or not Carolyn Bryant ended up recanting her story in 2017, makes little difference to what happens next, because there's nothing that can justify what happened to this 14-year-old boy at the hands of 2 grown men. Emmett Till's body was so grossly disfigured by the abuse that he endured that he could only be identified by the engraved ring that he wore that belonged to his father. Funerals of this kind are typically closed casket, but Emmett Till's mother insisted on an open casket funeral so that the world could see what they did to her boy. and the world did see in a photograph that was a critical turning point in the civil rights movement of the 50s and 60s. This nonfiction novel by Chris Crowe discusses the climate of a nation on the brink of dramatic social change. It examines the trial that went about how you would expect and the aftermath. There are maps that will help better illustrate the story and photos, including the infamous photo that landed this book on our list for our theme of photos that stop the world. All right, so book number 1. When we talk about history, we have to talk about cause and effect. Events don't just happen, right? So Derf Backderf has done his homework for this one, and he leaves no stone unturned in this graphic novel that details a tragic event in our nation history that happened about 50 years ago. This is Kent State, 4 Dead in Ohio by Derf Backderf. So I was really excited when this book came out this year because I read and loved My Friend Dahmer, and I know a lot of y'all did too. And this is by the same author and illustrator, Derf Backderf. In this book, he tells us the story, well, actually the events that led up to the story of May 4th, 1970, when the National Guard opened fire on a college campus, killing 4 students and wounding 9 others. Allison Krauss was 19. She was preparing to move that summer with her boyfriend, Barry. Bill Schroeder was also 19. He was a student and a member of the ROTC, and he was struggling to reconcile his feelings about the war in Vietnam with his potential future career in the armed forces. Sandy Schuer was a 20-year-old speech therapy student who was wholly uninvolved in the protests and was shot and killed as she was traveling between her classes. She had just begun a relationship with Jeff Miller, who was also 20, a student and a musician who at first was reluctant to join the demonstrators, but then had a renewed passion for activism based on his treatment by the police and the National Guard in days prior on campus. A photo of a 14-year-old girl kneeling over Jeff Miller's lifeless body earned photographer John Philo the Pulitzer Prize in 1971, and it also delivered a visual representation of this tragic event to every home in America. There's a lot that happens in this book. Protests, a culture of paranoia and fear, a critical local election, conflicts between the young students at Kent State University and the older residents of the city of Kent that surrounded it. There were FBI informants posing as students, tons of conspiracy theories, and Derf Backderf covers all of it in this compelling graphic novel that wraps up our list for this week. You all have heard the idiom that a picture is worth 1,000 words. And the stories that I brought to you today each have an image that conveyed very complex emotional ideas in a very impactful and efficient way using a photo. If you'd like to read more about the stories that go with these pictures, you can request any of the 3 books that we talked about today using the library website or just by sending me an email. And of course, if you'd like to read something else, I can take care of that too. Thank you guys so much for listening. I hope you have a beautiful week. I will be back next week with some more book talks for you from our library. Take care. Bye-bye.